What is good writing? I study this shit and I still don't know. There are a couple of things that most people agree on, and that's consistency in your world building and characters, setting up your ideas and having big moments happen in the climax. But beyond that, it's a mixed bag, and not everyone is going to agree on everything. There is a journey in the shonen fan demographic that looks like this.
Oh wow! Dragon Ball is the best thing ever! I want to go Super Saiyan!
Oh man, there are other shows just like Dragon Ball? Awesome! After watching sophisticated shows like Death Note and Hunter x Hunter, Dragon Ball is lacking nuance and is of far lesser writing quality than these masterpieces. Yes. Oh wow! Dragon Ball is the best thing ever! I want to go Super Saiyan! But why is that? Why does Dragon Ball elicit this reaction? Why does it make people question themselves and the story's writing quality? In my opinion, writing quality can most easily be measured by this metric. How well does it stand up upon rewatch or reread? And if your material can only be watched once, then it falls into two categories. You can only watch it once because the writing is not good enough to stand up to scrutiny. The writing quality is so good, but is tackling extremely sensitive subject matter, that it is too painful to sit through multiple times. Dragon Ball is easily rereadable, meaning it stands up to scrutiny. The problem in saying that, though, is that you could point to all of the inconsistent world-building details without having to think too hard about them. Additionally, some character trajectories don't always match up, and as the series goes on, it tends to repeat some of its narrative ideas a lot, like how no one can save the day except Goku. Characters are introduced just to move the plot along and then are left behind, and how we're always in a battle to save the world against someone we can't defeat easily. So how does it stand up to scrutiny if it makes so many mistakes? I'd boil it down to one simple thing. Dragon Ball is basically never wasting your time, and the only arc you can even accuse Dragon Ball of having done so is the Buu arc, which coincidentally is what the community considers to be the worst narrative. Interesting. Read the manga. The anime wastes your time constantly, but the source material reads at such a lightning fast pace you'd think it's an entirely different story. One of the most common pieces of writing advice of all time is show, don't tell. They say these things so that you can naturally have some mystique and intrigue built into your story, meaning that the audience wants to find out what's going on. And there is another core reason. All time spent on exposition and lore like magic systems and politics is time spent actively not telling a story. These setting details may or may not be used, but the truth remains. These are part 1s that are supposed to feed into part 2s. Otherwise, why are they there? Chekhov's gun. If you were a lorehead, you'd remember these exposited details anyway, so taking extended periods of time to pause will still make you wait for the next story beat like everyone else, and you are the audience who would be least fatigued by these details. Basically, no one wins. And in fact, puts more pressure on you as the creative to deliver on these setting elements with a higher standard for having taken up so much of the audience's time explaining it. And since the audience knows how the details work, they'll be able to call bullshit easier when the author makes a mistake, and that mistake might not have even been realized otherwise, or would be debated by fans for even being a mistake at all. In Dragon Ball, these things are not separated. You often get the lore as it's happening. Raditz drops the Saiyan bombshell as he's stealing Gohan. What we care about is that this bad guy stole Gohan, but we remember the Saiyan lore so vividly because of its attachment to the story. Super Saiyan gets name-dropped multiple times before Goku fights Frieza, but it is significantly less relevant than the Ginyu Force, which is important right now. Or how Roshi relays the tale of Demon King Piccolo long ago while Goku is chasing after Tambourine. Nearly all of the big lore drops are placed alongside motion and almost never pauses the story to relay this information. Does Hunter x Hunter really need to spend so long explaining the meta of rock, paper, scissors? No, probably not. I think we can skip this one. As I get older, different things become apparent to me, and I was initially blown away by Hunter x Hunter's intellectual portrayal, but when I returned to it recently, I was left with a profound vacancy because the story was not nearly as good as I remembered it. And Togashi's other work, Yu Yu Hakusho, proved to me that my mind wasn't playing tricks on me. Yu Yu Hakusho makes a lot of the same mistakes Dragon Ball does, and you could argue Hunter x Hunter is a lot more academically correct as a work, but I care about the characters in Yu Yu Hakusho, and the same guy wrote both of these stories. And it's due in large part to Yu Yu Hakusho not being obsessed with the details and being able to tell its stories without constantly pausing. I can skip Toei Animation's poor adaptation of Toriyama's work by reading the manga, but I cannot skip the indulgent over-explanation of the Raise of Hands gambit because it's baked into the story. What are the most memorable moments of Hunter x Hunter? Don't look it up. Think. Take your time. Are any of these what you thought of? Almost all of these moments are fondly remembered because they are moments in which the details come to bear and integrate properly into the story. And I bet many of you also thought of these as some of the most memorable moments. These are some of the most iconic moments in the whole series, but they have nothing to do with the elaborate magic system Togashi set up because they function on an emotional level without the need of a concept. As an aside, when I posited this thought experiment while writing the script, I mislabeled them as playing shogi, when in reality they were playing gungi, a game made for the story that resembles shogi. I did not remember what game they were playing, but I do remember the characters and the emotional moments incredibly strongly. Dragon Ball is lacking in that first category, but is filled to the brim with iconic moments in the second category because it's using all of its time actually telling stories. Hunter x Hunter's Chimera Ant arc is one of its best storylines because by that point it has finally acclimated the audience to its concepts and can begin telling its deeper combat meta-narratives. But the problem being, when rereading or rewatching the material, as a returning audience member, you're waiting for the story to actually start, which is in Heaven's Arena, because that is where Nen is introduced, and so much of the story is about building up the concept of Nen, and these characters using it in creative and interesting ways. This is a non-small flaw of Hunter x Hunter and what you will run into if you're not careful about the implementation of your setting details and magic systems and how important you think it is as the creative for the audience to know this information. Dragon Ball spends so much time on the gas and so little time on the reprieve and the rumination. In Dragon Ball, the downtime is assumed. Each time skip is Toriyama saying these characters had their time to decompress from these conflicts, and only the audience sees all the most important parts. Dragon Ball's deepest explanation of its core magic system comes in literally the final arc of the whole story. The character using the system is more important than the audience understanding the system. And the audience will understand this system anyway if they spend enough time watching the material and the material is consistent with its portrayals. Let me say it again. The magic system will make sense to the audience regardless if they watch it enough times. That's the reason they say show, don't tell.
I understand.
One of the core tenets of being an entertainer is to leave your audience wanting more. This is something I only really understood recently, and that's something that I've been chewing on for quite a while now, and Dragon Ball follows this principle really well and uses the concept of the time skip to make your brain fill in the gaps and wonder about the characters in their lives as they constantly change their outfits, hairstyles, and grow older. But Toriyama doesn't have to do anything or tell any stories. All he did was change a few character design details and the audience tells the story themselves. How did Yamcha get the scars? Who knows? Making so much of your story about a concept over the storytelling goes against show don't tell, and leaving your audience wanting more at the same time. Explaining your lore details is pointless past things that could be inferred or for flavor. And silly-ass Dragon Ball, of all properties, is able to execute on this incredibly sophisticated writing guideline much more effectively than other works who are touted as more highbrow and intellectual. Maybe there's something to be said about Dragon Ball being an overly simple story that lacks depth and makes a lot of hasty mistakes, but I'd argue that if a supposedly sophisticated story is still not able to draw out emotion from the audience, then they fail at the most important parts. An interconnected, well-thought-out plot is fantastic and shows great problem-solving ability and foresight, but people love Dragon Ball despite how messy and inconsistent its plotting is, because ultimately the journey is fun and the characters are extremely memorable. A good plot can't really save a poorly told story, but a good character in a bad story can still make you laugh or get hyped to see what they'll do next, and you'll remember them even if you forget the details. I think a well thought out magic system can also make you want to stick around and see what they do with it, but ultimately, when the new shiny toy becomes not so shiny, you just end up wanting that cool magic system and a better story with consistent characters anyway. All of the surface level easy fixes stuff are what Dragon Ball messes up, and I think that's why Dragon Ball gets a bad rap. It's easy to point out its flaws because they are visible. But the most important parts, the drama, the characters, memorable moments, and the climaxes are all delivered excellently and at a brisk pace that send the audience home happy. I'd call that good writing.